Credit Versio's Q&A Wednesday live for October 18th. I'm your host, David Michalek. With me again is my friend, John Ulzheimer, formerly with FICO and Equifax. John, welcome back. Good to have you, as always.
Thank you, all, as always, for having me, David. I appreciate the invitation.
Of course. Wouldn't be the same without you. All right, so as people are going to jump on today, as everybody knows who watches, whether you're watching this live or watching on the replay, the flow for these calls or these lives, essentially, we're going to start with a topic or two, and then, of course, that will morph into whatever direction the questions take us. So feel free to ask us whatever question you have about credit scores, credit bureaus, how FICO works, how VantageScore works. All that stuff is on the table. Happy to answer those questions for you. The only thing that we typically don't cover is specific credit repair techniques. But if you drop those into the comment section, I will do my best to answer those as quickly as possible. Okay, and John, I am curious. I need to check one thing. I just want to make sure we are streaming on Facebook, because I did get a little flag earlier. And we are. Nope, we're good. We're good. Yeah, you know how it is. We were just talking about how you get new equipment. Sometimes things don't work. So I did a software update for the software we're using right now, and it gave me a little bit of a flag, but turned out it was a false alarm. Okay, great. So as we get rolling here, John, what I wanted to start off the call with is for our valued viewers, our eager minds that are watching us today. Let's talk about really what a lot of people come to these lives for. Their invitation from having a Credit Versio account, and everybody here is going through the credit repair process. And even though we're not going to talk about credit repair specifically, it's not really necessary. But why don't we talk about like your top tips, like going through the process, trying to recover, rebuilding again, maybe getting past some mistakes that were made, or maybe there was a medical incident, or whatever the case may be. What would you say are your top 3-4 tips for recovering as quickly as possible in this process?
Yeah, so recovering or rebuilding is very different from building, right? They're similar in that you're trying to create something that looks different than it used to look, but they're definitely not the same thing. We all build credit from nothing, and so really the strategy is the same for all of us. But the path to higher scores is going to be different for all of us because the information on our credit report is not going to be the same. So strategy A may work for one person, but strategy B may work for another person, and strategy C may work for a third person, and those won't necessarily be interchangeable strategies, which is why it always bothers me when I say people online giving advice on how to improve scores, and they're not really even talking to a person. They're just kind of speaking in general, and their advice may or may not work for the folks who are looking at it. So assuming that rebuilding means you want to end up with a better looking credit report, and therefore you want to end up with better credit scores, then you have to address why you got there in the first place, right? And most people have lower scores because either they have derogatory information on their credit reports, they have excessive amounts of credit card debt that are too close to the credit limits on their credit cards.
Yeah.
Or they have some sort of a combination of those first two things, right? You can have a little bit of derogatory information and credit card debt, or you can have more derogatory information and not very much credit card debt and still have low scores, but you didn't get there the same way, even though the scores look fairly similar. Or you can have a really good payment history, you can have really respectable credit card debt, but you're screwing up on all the other things. And the payment history metrics are worth about a third of the points in your score. The debt-related metrics are also worth about a third of the points in your score, which means that if you do really well on those two metrics, then you've banked 2/3 of the points of the score, which leaves a whole third of the points that you really need to work on in order to have truly elite credit scores. So when people say, just make all your payments on time and, that'll be enough. That's all you need to do. That's a great start, but that's a third of the points in your score. So the way to come up with what I call a truly customized score improvement strategy, which is not going to be the same for any of the people watching us, is stop guessing at what you think should be done with your credit reports and start focusing on the directions that are given to you by your credit scores. So, and I'm not talking about the actual 3-digit score. So if I told someone, hey, you're a 700, and I told another person, hey, you're a 700, they're not going to know why they're a 700 or what they can do to improve that 700 unless they understand credit scoring. And most people, obviously the crowd watching us is the exception, but most people don't have a clue how credit scores work. They can make some presumptions, but that's about the extent of it. The deliverable with the 3-digit score, and I don't know how it works with the Credit Versio, credit reports and scores that y'all use for your service, David, but all the credit scores that are calculated are, the deliverable is the 3-digit number, and then up to 4 factors that indicate why that score wasn't higher. And those factors are formally referred to as adverse action codes. Some people call them reason codes. Some people call them score factors. We're saying the same thing, but we're just using a different term for it. But those factors are required in order for a credit score to be FCRA compliant. Because if the scores are used as a basis for a denial or some sort of adverse action, like a credit limit reduction or something like that, then the lender is required to disclose to the consumer this form notice called an adverse action notice. Most people call them denial letters, but they actually have a name. That's the notice of adverse action. So that notice has to give consumers the reasons why they were denied. And most lenders will copy and paste the score factors that came with the score onto the adverse action letters and then send those letters to consumers. And so when consumers get those letters, they may see, hey, Mr. Smith, we're sorry, but we've denied you. We've denied you based on information in your whatever credit report, Equifax, Experian, or TransUnion. And as part of our decision, we pulled your credit score. This is your credit score, and these are the reasons why your credit score wasn't higher. And then those letters will also include, it's required that they include the principal reasons why they made their decision. And to the extent the principal reasons are the same as the 4 score factors, then you're going to see things like, derogatory information, collection, public record, too many accounts with balances, inquiries, whatever. There's like 30 some odd of those score factors. And so while most people just look at those and kind of dismiss them, that's actually the roadmap to a higher score, because those 4 score factors, number one, they're the top 4 reasons why your score wasn't higher, and they're in order of hierarchy. So the number one of those 4 reasons is the top reason why your score wasn't higher. The second one is the second, the third is the third, and the fourth is the fourth. Some people who are unfortunately familiar with notices of adverse action or score disclosure notices, for those of you who have applied for a mortgage loan in the past few years, if you go to your files and look at the residential mortgage credit report or the score disclosure notice that the lender has to give to you, then you'll see that those scores are listed on the score disclosure notice with the factors, and some of them may have a 5th one that indicates that inquiries were material to your score, which means that the number of inquiries on your credit report did have a measurable impact to your score. That is sometimes referred to as the 5th reason code. That's not really what it is. It's a required disclosure in the Fair Credit Reporting Act if inquiries even had 1 point of an influence. I don't understand why that was so important that had to be codified into law, but nonetheless it is. And so therefore, I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that every time your score is calculated, you're given a roadmap to what, there should be no ambiguity as to what you can do to improve your score. Now, whether or not you can actually do those things, that's a completely different story, right? I mean, you can't just snap your fingers and all the bad stuff disappears from your credit report, despite what some people might lead you to believe. And you certainly can't just snap your fingers and eliminate all your credit card debt. That would require you to have, in some scenarios, tens of thousands of dollars of disposable income and that you want to pay to your credit card insurers. So clearly, while the roadmap is easy to determine, executing the roadmap may be difficult and certainly is likely to be time consuming And in some scenarios, it could be expensive.
Yeah, as far as like, let's kind of drill this down into some more. Now, granted, I don't imagine that there's going to be a whole lot of people who are going through the process right now that have their adverse action letters handy and are going to go through them. So let's just take some broad behaviors that people can take with them. Let's say we're not going to drill this down to like granular to where these are the four things that we absolutely have to do, but let's approach it like, let's say credit education is a relatively new thing for people. Say, and I've seen this many times, John. I imagine you have as well, where people get themselves into a bad situation and not fully aware of how that's going to impact them for years. Now, this is setting aside from, I think everybody by and large has an understanding that there is a debt that needs to be paid. It's got to be paid. Maybe it wasn't for whatever reason. We'll put that over on this side. But moving forward, what do you think there are some things that people don't understand about credit that's going to have that has a big impact on them, and things that they just should be aware of as they move forward, whether they're rebuilding or maybe even building credit for the first time?
Yeah, and look, I'm almost at my 32nd year in this business. So I've had a seat at the table for a really long time and have been able to watch this whole thing operate for decades. I have a very, very hard time believing that someone authentically and genuinely doesn't understand credit management basics, right? It doesn't take a college degree in economics to understand the benefits of paying your bills on time. It doesn't take a college degree in finance to understand that being in too much debt is bad, is worse than being in less. So these are things that I think are common sense, and they are aligned with what people have to do in order to not only build good credit reports, but also maintain good credit reports and also rebuild good credit reports. So I do hear and read a lot of criticism about the credit system as, it serving a certain group of consumers who are highly educated and have access to education that teaches them how to do these things properly. But if I just told you, hey, pay your bills on time, don't get into too much credit card debt, lather, rinse, repeat, and you're going to have 800 scores, and you can't help but have 800 scores. To me, that's pretty simple and didn't require anything more than you listening for the last 8 seconds. So that really is the formula. If you avoid negative information, I know people keep beating that like a dead horse, but let's talk about that for a minute. If you end up with something derogatory on a credit report, it means that at the very least you went over 50 days delinquent. 50, not 30, 50, because there's a 30-day grace period. Actually, I'm sorry, it could be as much as 59 days delinquent, depending on the timing of when your bills, when your statement is cut and whatnot. So someone being 30 days delinquent, which means you have a 30-day delinquency on a credit report, really means that they're almost 2 months delinquent from a credit reporting perspective, because 30 days delinquent really means 30 to 59 days. 60 days means 60 to 89 days. 90 means 90 to 119 days. So it's not just 30 days late. It's actually a pretty considerable range. So you have a pretty substantial built-in grace period in the credit reporting world, where we have up to, or at the very least, 29 days to make payments on things 29 days to be delinquent on things before they can end up on a credit report. So at the very very least, you should avoid anything that's worse than a 60-day delinquency. And here's why. In the credit scoring world, there is a difference between a minor derogatory event and a major derogatory event. A major derogatory event is a huge problem. A minor derogatory event is a huge problem, but not for very long, okay? To the extent that you cure a minor delinquency, then essentially the minute it starts to age on a credit report, the less, unless it's going to be problematic. The problem with the major delinquencies is once you cure them, they're always going to be a major delinquency for the life that thing is on your credit report, which is why credit repair companies counsel their clients to try to get that bad stuff deleted, because everybody who understands anything about credit knows that major derogatories they're a bad deal. So if you're going to choose to, and no one goes into this, planning on defaulting on things, right? That's not, I don't think people get credit for the intent of defaulting unless they're just a straight up fraudster, and that's a different type of bad. But to the extent you can at least limit the bad stuff and limit it to the lower level delinquencies, then from a rebuilding perspective, kind of back to your question, the rebuilding process is going to be easier and it's going to take less time. And it doesn't necessarily require a deletion in order for your score to start improving, where anything that's 90 days past due or worse, and you can make every assumption you want, collections, charge-offs, settlements, repos, foreclosures, bankruptcy, all that stuff is a major derogatory event. So 90 days or worse, and anything that's currently delinquent or currently past due, those are all major derogatory events. So to the extent you can avoid that compartment of derogatory information, and if you are going to have derogatory information, if you can limit it to the minor derogatory compartment, then while it's not good, it's certainly better than it could be. And that's just that one category. So that one category is, it's a third of the points, and so it's a huge deal. If you don't fall in that category, then you may not be sniffing low 700s, let alone the 800s.
Let's put a pause there for a second. We got a whole handful of questions that came in. Let's get to these, and then we want to go into I got a couple of things I want to add to that. Okay. Frank with a question from a minute ago. One of the things that happens when you do a software update is it resizes everything. There we go, Frank. We'll get you readable size here. If I pay an installment account down to below, what was that? Below? Oh, I think he meant. Hold on, one more time. Below, it looks like 1 cent. Would I be able to get a double benefit impact of both having an extra account with a zero balance and an open installment trade line?
Yeah. So,
he says he swings back around and says at a zero balance.
Yeah. So obviously, when you have an installment debt at a zero balance, it's not an open account any longer. It's in a finalized status, and the credit industry's guidance is that you're supposed to update it the following month to indicate that it's in a finalized status or closed. And so it's going to show up as a closed account with a zero balance. I think I understand what your strategy is, Frank. It's first off, if you have an installment loan, you have to make a payment every single month unless it's in deferments or forbearance. So even if you paid it down to $1 or less than $1, you still have to make a payment the next month unless you get the lender to forgive that final amount, and then they're going to close the account anyway. So I think you have a timing issue in that respect. But yeah, look, I think the question that you're really asking is it better to have active installment accounts, and is it also better to have accounts that have zero balance? Yes to both of those questions. So one of the things I think, David, we may have talked about during one of the lives last month, or maybe in previous months, is why in the world did my credit score go down after I paid off my car loan? Yeah. Or why did my credit score go down after I got done paying off my student loans? And the answer is because you get rewarded for having active installment accounts. And so obviously making a payment on an installment loan, while I think we'd all rather have zero balances on everything. You do get this tangential benefit of having recent activity on an installment loan. But also, Frank, to keep it, just another thing, the real metric that is important in that particular category, which is the number of accounts with balances, is credit cards. So really what you would like to do and I like your creativity. I'm not being critical of you whatsoever. I'm actually being complimentary of how creative you're thinking here. If you're going to be creative in your debt management, can I suggest that you're creative in your debt management on credit cards rather than on installment loans, because you're going to get more bang for your creativity, because the fewer credit cards with balances, the better your scores are going to be. Installment loans, and people, for some odd reason, people like to argue with me about this, but installment debt is almost immaterial to your credit score as long as you're making payments every single month, which is why sometimes you're penalized by not having it because you're rewarded for having it. That's one of the reasons why when people take out large mortgages or large car loans, their credit scores really don't move very much because of the debt. And that's because the debt itself it defaults at a much lower rate than unsecured debt, because most of the time installment debt is secured and you don't want to lose your house and you don't want to lose your car. People don't care about losing their credit cards if times get rough. So the debt that's really problematic is the credit card debt, not necessarily the installment debt. So thumbs up on the creativity. Let me just redirect you perhaps towards the credit cards in that respect.
Yeah, great advice. Stan says, hello, Credit Versio family, and question on inquiries. Dave, why, when you go to a dealership and you already have a pre-approved form from a reputable finance company, they still shotgun your credit out to all 5 lenders and send it to your pre-approval. Pre-approval got approved. I think I know what you're saying here, Stan. Now they shotgun the.
I got shotgun. What's the deal? That's what you got to say. That's all you got to say, Stan.
So there's a couple reasons for that, Stan, and this is coming from a guy that used to work F&I for GM back in the Saturn days. I'm going back about 20 years, but one reason why they run your now. Back in the day, I never would shotgun anybody's credit when they came in with a pre-approved loan, or they were going to pay cash for their car. But the one thing that you have to do is you do have to do at least, I think it's called a 3-liner, might have been a 5-liner, where we would still have to run the credit, because you might come in and give us a bogus pre-approved letter from, even back then you can make up a pre-approval letter, or you can write a bad check. So one of the things that all F&I finance and insurance, that's what F&I stands for, at a dealership has to do per insurance purposes, is they have to run your credit report anyway, just to make sure you're not somebody who's going to write a bad check. And they do have to give you a temporary loan approval. I forgot exactly what it's called. Like I said, it's been years. Oh, no, it's called an option contract. Just came back to me. So what happens is when you have a pre-approval or you write a check for a car, and obviously the loan that you got from, say, your credit union is not going to be paid right there on the spot before you drive off with the car. Same thing with the check that you write, although I think technology's changed a little bit since. So in order for you to drive off the lot with that car, you have to have financing in place. And typically it's done by that dealership. And then when you sign your documentation, you'll see notification down at the bottom about an option contract, which means you have like 10 days to replace the financing with your own, in this case, with your pre-approval. That's how that works. Now, maybe they shot your application everywhere because they wanted to try to beat the rate. And if your credit's good enough, they will. There's a big incentive financially for dealerships to keep that financing in-house. There's a lot of money to be made there. So if they can beat the rate, they'll try to do that. And they know, and maybe you don't know this, but it doesn't matter if they ran your application 3, 4, 5, 10 times. It all counts as one inquiry anyway, and they got to run your credit one time anyway for you to drive off the lot with that car. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yep, it does. So let me add to that. So here's what I did while you were talking. I went to the Facebook. Broadcast of this webinar, whatever we call these things.
Yeah.
And I posted a link in the comment section, which I think David now shows up at the
bottom.
Oh yeah.
Yep, I see it.
So this is for this is for Stan, and this is for everybody else who has the same question about going to an auto dealership and what what entails a permissible purpose for an auto dealership to pull a credit report. In 1998, and this is called the coffee letter. And in my world, we just kind of call this the coffee letter, and everyone knows what I'm talking about, and everyone knows what everyone else is talking about when people mention the coffee letter. So, like 25 years ago, the head of the Texas Automotive Dealers Association asked the Federal Trade Commission for their opinion on what constitutes a legitimate business need and permissible purpose to access someone's credit report. And the FTC gave them an answer to that question, which is the same answer to the question that I think you're asking. So read the coffee letter. It's about 3 paragraphs. It's not very long. And this is going to be what the Federal Trade Commission thinks about the process of pulling credit reports for people who walk onto lots and are just, window shopping or whatnot. So that'll give you kind of an FTC's perspective on the issue. But let's talk about the impact of those inquiries just while we're here, because I don't want you to walk away from this with just a kind of a bad taste in your mouth, because people who find out they've been shotgunned will generally walk away with a bad taste in their mouth. The way that FICO's scoring systems, and to some extent VantageScore's scoring systems, are engineered is with the assumption that consumers are going to shop for interest rates. And one of the ways that shopping for interest rates is displayed or is metastasized on a credit report is in the form of a lot of inquiries from similar lenders in a short period of time, right? You can say this about auto lenders. You can say this about mortgage brokers. And to some extent, you can say this about private student loan lenders.
Yeah.
So to avoid number one, to avoid disincenting consumers from aggressively shopping for interest rates, which they should do because you want to pay less for stuff. And number two, to mimic the likely intent of a consumer who has a lot of inquiries from the same type of lender in a small period of time, which is I'm shopping for something. Both FICO and VantageScore have been engineered to consider, and I'm using your example, Stan, would consider those 5 hard inquiries as one inquiry for the scoring process. And the reason they would be considered one inquiry is because they're all, in VantageScore's system, they're within 14 days of each other. In FICO's consideration, they're within 45 days of each other. And so because of that, the models assume that all those inquiries are for one car, not for 5 car loans. And therefore, the impact on the score is the same as one inquiry, which is in line with your intent. Now, if you told the lender, don't pull my credit report, I have my own financing, I'm gonna write you a check, don't pull my credit. If you make it evidently clear that you don't want them pulling your credit report and they ignored you and they did it anyways, then we may have a problem, because then there is an argument that they did not have permissible purpose. And if you read that coffee opinion, just walking onto the lot and checking out the new Audi may not constitute permissible purpose to pull someone's credit report. I can tell you, David, from my expert witness experience, at any given time, I have a small handful of cases where I'm either an expert for an auto dealership that did this and they got sued, or I'm an expert for a consumer who is suing an auto dealership because it got done to them and they have sued. So it does find its way into the courts. What I call them the impermissible access cases, and it becomes really a battle of the experts and what is the impact or the true impact of an inquiry, and did you have a permissible purpose to do them?
Yeah. LaWanda, obviously paying bills on time is the key, but what are the most important things to do to get back on track? So there's 2 things, John, I was going to suggest. One is probably the key thing to suggest. And this is just from looking at, tens of thousands of credit reports over the last 10 years, especially my first year in the business where I did a lot of consulting with people. And one of the things that I would see a lot are people who have these rolling 30s, rolling 60s, because they're just chronically behind. And when I've talked to these people, one of the things that would have saved a lot of this is if they did one simple thing. I do it with all my credit cards. John, I don't know if you do this too, but in case something comes up, I don't know if I got sick, maybe I'm in the hospital, or I'm in some way not able to get to my smartphone. All 5 of my credit cards have an automatic minimum payment setting on them, meaning if I don't pay them off in full, which I typically do, then if I were to just go off in the distance somewhere, do a walkabout or something like that, my credit cards would still automatically draft the minimum payment out of my account. That is a very, very critical thing. I've never needed that, but I can rattle off the names of a couple of my friends. One who had major surgery years ago, that had he not done that, he would have had some late payments on his, because he was out for a long, long time and really incapacitated. So that's one thing I would suggest doing if you guys haven't already done it. Okay, Frank. So will a major derog not weigh negatively into your overall score until it has been cured?
No. It weighs. It's considered the minute it occurs. It's whenever your score is calculated, it considers whatever it is on your credit report at that point in time. So if it's a minor derog, it's considered a minor derog at that time. If it's a major derog, it's considered a major derog at that time. If it's in good standing, then I'm going to use kind of an egghead term. It's considered a non-bad, which is what most English-speaking people call a good account. So in credit scoring, there's actually minor derog, major derog, and non-bads. No one talks like that in the normal world, but that's what they're formally referred to. But so they're either considered good, minor, or major.
But John, we've said this before that the hardest impact of these kind of major derogs is really the first 24 months, and then the more distance you put between yourself and that, assuming you're doing everything else right, you're not engaged in any other high risk activity, that these become less and less of an impact on your score as they age.
Yeah, here's the most impactful derogatory event. Someone has FICO 830, right? So they're elite. They're the elite of the elite. They have FICO 830, and then boom, an account reports as being currently past due for $1,000. That is a plummeting score at that point, because it's such a high score to begin with that they're earning so many points in every category, and they're going to not earn a lot of those points anymore. So the difference in scores is going to be really drastic versus someone who's like a 680 and misses a payment. Their score may or may not go down at all because they've already screwed up in other areas. But it's not only a current delinquent event, but it's a major derog. It's got a past due balance. It's everything wrong with a derogatory event. It's current, it's major, and it's got a dollar value to it. Bad. And you started with a fantastic score, so the difference is going to be kind of eye-popping, if you will. Now, if you cure that the following month, it's going to go from being currently past due to current, meaning in good standing. It's going to go from having a past due balance to not having a past due balance. And it's going to go from being a major derog, which is what a current delinquent, an account that's currently delinquent is a major derog. It's going to go from being a major derog to a minor derog, because now it's a historical 30-day delinquency that is going to start aging. So it's going to be 1 month old, 2 months old, and 3 months old, et cetera, et cetera. And that's when what you just brought up, that's when that starts to kick in, is now you're putting time between yourself and that event. And that's when you're going to start seeing your score start to gradually improve. It's never going to improve back to 830 until that thing is gone. That's the breaks. That's the downside of having something like that on a credit report, is that you can't get back to that elite level with that kind of thing on the report. You could certainly recover to a point where you can operate just fine in the world of consumer credit, assuming that all your credit card issuers didn't just close all of your accounts from underneath you when they saw that thing hit your report and they saw your score plummet. Now they've overreacted to, which they can certainly do, and some of them do that. Then you have a utilization problem, because now you have less credit limits, and so it just spirals out of control. And there's like this collateral effect of missing one payment. Now all of a sudden you have cards closing, your utilization's going up, and you're like, all I did was miss one damn payment. What did I do with myself? Which underscores the importance of utilizing the auto pay function, like what you just brought up, because that'll never happen if you use the auto pay function.
Yeah. 1971 living. How can you avoid getting stall letters from the credit bureaus when disputing via the mail? I'll jump in on this one, John. You can add whatever you want to add as well. But one of the things that we see if we ever get customer service emails and calls about that is people didn't follow the instructions and they didn't put in their ID. That's the big one. As far as stall letters go, that's the biggest one that I ever see is proof of address, and your ID's got to accompany your letter, especially if you've moved recently and they don't have that address on file, and they're just looking out for your identity, looking out for to protect you. So that's usually the biggest reason. John, anything on that? Or?
Keep in mind that the credit bureaus, there's no requirement in the Fair Credit Reporting Act that the credit bureaus are mind readers. It's simply not there. So if you sent a letter saying, I dispute my credit report, my first name is John, but they're either going to not do anything in response to your letter because they're not required to, or they may send you what you're referring to as a stall letter, which I've never heard it called that before. But again, if they can't locate your credit report in their system because you didn't give them sufficient or accurate information, then they can't perform an investigation because they don't know what it is you're disputing. They can't compile your credit report in order to instigate an investigation. And so that's why, and we've had this discussion in the past, David, that if you want the credit bureaus to do something, then make it clear what you want them to do. And make it so like a 5-year-old would understand it. Here's my credit report. I circled what's wrong. It's wrong because of this. Here's my name. Please invest. It's hard to argue that you don't understand what the consumer is asking for at that point versus a letter that is crafted for no other reason than to try to obfuscate and maybe try to trick the credit. Again, you don't want me as the expert on the bureau side, and let's just put it that way, because I'm going to crush any craziness like that, because there's a lot of credit bureau companies that is their intent, and so it's not hard to pick out those letters that are
I think if
not trying to be overt and clear, they're just trying to kind of play games with the bureaus.
Yeah, I mean, we have, as you know, the letters, and I think what he's talking about is, if he's using Credit Versio, which is very plain and very easy to understand it, and he's still getting a stall letter, it could be because of an identity issue. You can always email support 1971 Living and just ask them to take a look, but I imagine that's probably what it is. Greg with a question: how do you know how successful Smart Credit is at debt settlement, and would you use it over a large, more established debt settlement company? Greg, I can't answer that question for you. That's a service that Smart Credit provides, and it's not connected to Credit Versio in any way. Smart Credit's just one of several different credit report providers that is compatible with Credit Versio. So you could ask them that question directly. They have customer support. Drake Hen, is it necessary to send a letter to Original Furnisher for validation of information? No, you can do that directly to the bureau, which is called an indirect dispute. You certainly can send it directly to the creditor if you like. Any thoughts on that, John?
Yeah, I think he may be referring to collections, right? Because there's a requirement to validate the debt for collections.
Yeah, he said an Original Furnisher, so that's possible. He could be referring to the original creditor, or to a collection.
Yeah, or Original Furnisher would be the original. I think that would be the original creditor.
Yeah.
I mean, you have the right under the FDCPA to ask for debt validation, and it depends on who you choose to listen to be quite honest with you. Some people say go through the bureaus, because if you go through the bureaus, then you set up a private right of action against the bureaus. Some people will say, no, go directly to the data furnisher. In this case, it'd be the collection agency, because then you set up a private right of action against the collection. So really, it's almost like a legal strategy, right? Depending on who you send the letter to is to who you can sue if they get it wrong. If you're really just legitimately trying to get the debt validated, that there's really nothing wrong with calling or contacting the collection agency directly and asking them, where can I send a request for debt validation, or can I just do request for debt validation on the telephone with you right now?
All right, and I'll make this one real quick. Can you remove inquiries by letter? You can dispute anything that you want, especially if the inquiries are not yours and you see them on there. And yeah, letters are always good. I'm a big fan of letters because there's a paper trail. But if you're just like disputing inquiries for the sake of disputing inquiries because they're on your credit report, that's not something I'm a big fan of for a couple of reasons. One, if they're yours, they're yours. It's something that also doesn't even really have much of an impact on you anyway. So there's a lot of fear. John and I, we won't beat this one into the ground like we normally do. But John, we don't seem to go more than maybe a couple of months without having to get on the inquiry, the inquiry pedestal or pulpit or whatever you want to call it. But we won't do it today. Yeah, to answer your question, right? Yeah, you can, but I really wouldn't. We got so many questions down here. Let's not talk about inquiries. Oh, I like this one from Frank. Thank you for that info, Dr. J. You're Dr. J now, John. You're a real hard ass a lot of the time. I had a few embarrassing credit mishaps previously, but you're also a fountain of knowledge, and I appreciate that info. Listen, why do you guys think I bring John on here? Like, I could probably have 5,000 people watching this stream if I had Javon the Bureau Killer on here talking about all kinds of crazy, stupid stuff. Is
that a real person? Is that a real?
Yeah, that's not the name, but that is a real. I had somebody on YouTube one time message me. He's like, "How come you only bring on John and the attorneys and this guy?" And I'm like, "Listen, the only thing I care about is somebody that's got qualifications. If you don't come from the bureaus, or you're not an attorney, or you have some specialized knowledge in the area, I don't care what you have to say. I just don't. I've seen it all. I like to think I've seen it all. Yeah, the Bureau Killer. Sounds something medieval. Like this is the guy that you hire to go, get rid of the witches in the village or something like that, or whatever. All right, let's. Dinesh. Okay. Quick question here. Quick question here. I had a finished lease, and they gave me a charge months after I returned the lease in the amount of $481, and then when I didn't respond, that they upped the charge to next one, $1,981. I have the letters. Can I do anything with this, even though I already got the account closed as unpaid in the process now with you guys to dispute it all?
So I'll let David answer from the what can I do about a credit reporting perspective. I'm going to answer it from the here's what you should do perspective. It sounds like you had I'm interpreting your message, and it sounds like the question you're asking had to do with some sort of an automobile lease, and you turned in the lease, and they somehow determined that there were residual fees left of $481. That can be things like excess mileage, excess wear and tear. Some states, the leasing company pays your annual tax on your car, and if you don't lease it any longer, then there's an amount that's due for the period of time that you had the car. So there could be, I guess my point is there could be a residual amount due to them for taxes. So and they're going to want that back. And so for some reason they're hitting you with $481. That should be relatively clear. I believe they're required to disclose to you the breakdown of those fees. The way that is generally handled for auto leasing is that is an unpaid amount of the lease. And it can incur fees, just like anything else that you can incur fees on anything else. And if you ignore them, then that dollar amount is likely going to go up, and they're likely going to eventually charge off that amount. So which means it's going to end up, instead of being a lease that was likely in good standing during the entirety of the lease, then you turned in the car and didn't pay the residual or the end of lease fees And now they're going to report that as being a charge off. And that's to hit from the topic we talked about earlier. That's a major derog, and that's a 7-year, that's a 7-year deal. So if I were you, rather than worrying about just how to get it off my credit report, which doesn't get rid of it, it just gets rid of it on a credit report. It doesn't mean they can't sue you to try to collect it. And that's a large enough dollar amount that they may try something sneaky like that. I would go back to the leasing company and see if there's any way y'all can work out a settlement for that amount, and then be done with it. So it stops if you pinch the hose essentially on the dollar amount, the meter running on the fees and penalties that you owe them. And then you can kind of focus on what David, I think, is going to talk about, which is the credit reporting aspect of it.
Well, I don't know, Dinesh, if I'm going to be able to give you a whole lot of rainbows and sunshine on the credit reporting or the credit disputing side of it, because here's my default position on stuff like this. And this is coming from having hundreds and hundreds of conversations with people who have told me this during the consultation. Well, I didn't pay it because of the principal. It wasn't right. I didn't agree with it. And then I'm the guy that gets to look at the aftermath of that, like I said, hundreds and hundreds of times. So my position is, and this is personal too, like this is what I would do personally. Even if you might not agree with the total dollar amount, it just pays, as long as it's within your ability, to just settle it. Because like what John was saying is, things are only going to get worse. What are you going to do? So you don't agree with it. They've added on some fees. Things are just going to get worse. It could go to a charge off, then to a collection. They might sue you. So the trajectory of this is all bad. So I would get on the phone and say, listen, I had a fee of $481. Can we just go back to that and I'll pay that? Or try to find some way to get that $1,981 as close to that $481 as you possibly can. And don't get off the phone with them until it's done, until you have something agreed and you have it paid, and just don't let it escalate, because it's just going to be more and more problems if it goes on. Okay, let's see.
In 2 months, the next question might be, hey, now it's on my credit report as a charge off. How can I get it off? Or, hey, I got served in the mail by a process server. What can I do about it? So I think David made a very good point. Try to end it now, and then you're avoiding all of the nastier stuff that can come later on.
Yeah. Like I said, I can't tell you how many times I've seen it. And sometimes I've seen people have multiple collections for $30, $40 from utilities or from something silly because they didn't agree with it, or they thought they were being done wrong. And so their answer was, I'm just not going to pay it. And I'm like, have you any idea what this has done to your credit? What this really cost you as far as interest rates and decline, everything else that happens as a result of collections on the credit report and derogatory information on the credit report. Sometimes the best way to win things like this is just to give into it and see the big picture. Sometimes it doesn't pay to wrestle with these things. Okay, Frank, question: any advice on how to best groom your FICO 452 scores 6-ish months out from applying for a mortgage? Good question.
Yeah, and you're still dealing with FICO 4, 5, and 2 in 6 months. We're not We're not at FICO 10T and Vantage Score 4, probably for a couple more years, anyways. There's really not that much to tell you other than the normal advice on how to prep a score. I guess the big difference between those older scores and the newer scores is the treatment of medical collections and $0 collections. And so to the extent you have any of that stuff on your credit report, to the extent you can get that stuff paid off or settled with a zero balance, that would actually be better because, and also Fannie and Freddie don't really care about those types of things anymore, but they may require you to pay them off. But to the extent you're just try to get your credit card balances as low as you possibly can right before you make the application. Those scoring models don't use trended data, so they don't care what your balances were 2 months ago. They only care what your balances were last month. So to the extent you can kind of time it right where your balances are as low as absolute. And if you pay, look, here's one. If you pay your credit cards in full every single month, and you have the capability of doing that, then keep doing that. That's great, because then you're not paying interest. But the month before you apply for your loan, pay off your credit card balances before the statement closing date, and then they'll all show up as zero balances on your credit report, and your utilization will go to zero. So you'll be able to you're going to forego the grace period, but to the extent you don't care, look, your mortgage APR is probably going to be about 7.5%, and that's with really, really good credit. So to the extent you can get that score as high as possible, it's going to make an already adversely priced mortgage loan, because that's where we are right now in the history of mortgage loans. It's going to make it as it'll minimize the pain as much as possible, even though it's going to be painful anyways.
All right, John, we're coming up. Let's make this our last question, then we'll call it a day. And for those of you whose question didn't get answered, I will swing back around and answer those for you in the comments. If there's a question specific to, I think there was a question from Bobby Hutchinson about Credit Versio. Send that to support@creditversio.com, and then Travis will take care of that one for you, because that might require him taking a look at your account and see what's going on. All right, let's finish up with this question right here from Lynn Lee. Hi, David and John. Should I close a credit card account that charges an annual fee? If so, how does that affect my score? I pay down all my credit cards to 1 to 7% and building my credit. Great question.
Yeah. Hey, I'm not sure I have any additional advice for you other than just 1 to 7% is fantastic. I know I hate answering a question with a question, but so I'll kind of ask it rhetorically. I am of the opinion that annual fees on credit cards are not that big of a deal. If your annual fees are, $100, $200 for your credit cards, and what that buys you is some amount of portable capacity, right? $10,000 credit limit, $20,000 credit limit. That's, you're going to pay an annual fee for a HELOC. So what's the difference in paying an annual fee for a credit card? It's the same thing, right? It's access to a line of credit, and you're paying for the access to the line of credit. So to the extent that you're down to 1 to 7% utilization, and it's that low because you have unused credit cards that have a fairly high credit limit, by closing them, your utilization ratios are going to go up. It's a mathematical certainty. So if you're going to close credit cards, then fine. That's your choice. But don't do it right before you apply for something, because your scores may go down as a result of the utilization spike. And I would also reconsider the choice to close the credit card and weigh it against what may or may not be an immaterial annual fee. I've got 2 credit cards that have annual fees of almost $600 each. And you may be thinking, what an idiot. This guy's a credit expert. The amount of stuff I get for $600 a year it is about $6,000 or $7,000 at retail if I were to go buy it. And I use it all. So it's not just stuff that I could buy, but I choose not to. It's stuff that I do buy and need it because I travel so much. So for me, I'm getting things at basically 10% of the retail value by paying the annual fee on a credit card. Plus, I get, the ability to go into the Sky Club and whatever. My point is that your annual fee may actually be getting you things much more valuable than what your annual fee is. And that doesn't even include the portable capacity, however many thousands of dollars of buying power you have, plus what I call credit score insurance, because it's keeping your utilization ratios lower. Even in months where you may charge a whole lot more on those other credit cards, your ratios are not going to spike as much because you have unused credit limits on those other credit cards. Just if you're going to keep them open, just use them periodically, just so that for something, pick up your dry cleaner, fill up your car using that credit card, or buy your Amazon Prime stuff with that credit card. And then at least you're getting some usage out of it, and the card issuer doesn't have an incentive to close the account or lower your credit limit because of the inactivity. But generally speaking, I'm anti closing cards just because of annual fees.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, John, that's it. Let's wrap it up. It's the longest we've gone in a while. Everybody who has joined us today. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. And thanks for the questions. Great questions today. If we didn't get to it, my apologies. I'll swing back around in the comment section and answer those questions for you. John, thanks again. I appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Sean.